Imagine a medieval village on the morning of a wedding. The air smells of smoke from hearths, church bells ring faintly in the distance, and neighbors gather in curiosity. But unlike the weddings we imagine today, with flowers, rings, and love at the center, this union is not about romance. In the Middle Ages, marriage was rarely a choice of the heart, it was a contract, a transaction, a negotiation between families. Picture the bride, perhaps no more than 14 or 15, her face pale under a heavy veil. She does not walk with excitement but with duty, led forward by her father who has already arranged her future. For peasants, marriage often meant securing land, pooling labor, and ensuring survival. For nobles, it was about power, property, and alliances that could change the fate of kingdoms. Love was a luxury few could afford. The rituals themselves were stark. There were no flowing white gowns, no carefully chosen vows whispered under candlelight. Instead, the couple might stand outside the doors of a church, the priest blessing their union in the cold morning air while villagers looked on. A simple clasp of hands, a spoken promise, and the marriage was sealed before God. Rings were rare, flowers almost unheard of. Sometimes a coin or a small piece of cloth was exchanged to symbolize the deal. For many, it felt more like signing a contract than beginning a romance. The idea of marrying for love was so unusual that it was often viewed with suspicion. If two people desired each other too strongly, it might be considered sinful, a temptation of the flesh rather than a holy bond. For noble families, weddings became elaborate political tools. A young girl might be married off to a man decades older, chosen not for his kindness but for his lands and armies. Imagine the hall of a castle filled with banners, feasting tables, and nobles in furs, but at the center of it all, a bride and groom who have scarcely spoken before this day. Their union is not their own, it belongs to their families, their lords, and their kingdoms. These marriages secured treaties, ended wars, or brought wealth, but rarely brought joy to the bride. Many were too young to even understand what marriage meant. And yet, these were the bonds that shaped dynasties. Even among peasants, the expectations of marriage were heavy. The church demanded its blessing for unions, condemning secret vows or hand-fasting ceremonies done without a priest. Couples caught living together without marriage could be punished, even excommunicated. And yet, in small villages, people sometimes ignored the strict rules. They held simple gatherings, spoke vows before witnesses, and considered themselves bound. These unions were fragile in the eyes of the law but powerful in the eyes of the community. Still, the weight of survival pressed hard. A wife was expected to bear children quickly, to tend fields, cook, and manage the home. A husband was expected to provide and protect. Marriage was not an escape into romance, it was the beginning of work, responsibility, and often, hardship. For the people of the Middle Ages, weddings were not about falling in love, they were about survival, duty, and power. What we imagine today as a celebration of hearts was, for them, a solemn binding of lives under the gaze of God and the community. Romance, if it came at all, came later, as a rare blessing rather than a promise. And yet, despite the harsh realities, weddings were still moments that communities marked with noise, food, and ritual, even if romance was absent. Once the vows were spoken, a medieval village often turned the event into a gathering. For peasants, this meant long wooden tables crowded with bread, cheese, ale, and whatever meat could be spared. Neighbors laughed, children played, and the air filled with music from fiddles, pipes, or even simple clapping. But the celebration was not about the couple's happiness, it was about the community's survival. A marriage meant two households joined, more hands for labor, more children to come, and a stronger village. Behind the laughter, the meaning was always practical. In noble courts, the spectacle was far greater. Feasts stretched for days, with roasted swans, spiced wine, and tables groaning under exotic foods. Minstrels sang songs praising the union, banners hung from rafters, and noble guests toasted with silver goblets. But even here, the heart of the bride and groom mattered little. The joy was political, the celebration one of alliances, treaties, and dynasties secured. A noble wedding might be followed immediately by political negotiations, the bride's dowry discussed while the feast still roared around her. To outsiders, it seemed splendid, to the bride herself, it might feel like gilded captivity. Still, love sometimes crept in through the cracks of duty. Not every union was loveless. Some couples, bound together by arrangement, grew to respect and even care for each other. Others defied the system in secret, romances blooming outside the bonds of marriage, whispered poems exchanged in courtyards, or forbidden lovers meeting in the shadows. The tales of courtly love that spread through medieval Europe, knights writing poetry for unattainable ladies, or troubadours singing of forbidden passion, were born from a world where marriage and love were rarely the same. For most, the wedding was duty, and love was a dangerous luxury found only in stories. The strange truth of medieval weddings is that they remind us how differently people once understood the bonds of marriage. What we see today as a celebration of choice and affection was, in their world, a matter of survival, politics, and obedience. The bride's veil was not a symbol of purity but of her family's control. The vows were not promises of love but contracts before God and society. And yet, through it all, people endured, found laughter in feasts, and sometimes even carved moments of tenderness from the stone walls of duty. To step into a medieval wedding is to step into a world where romance was scarce, but survival was everything. And while love may not have been the foundation, these unions still shaped families, villages, and kingdoms, proof that even without romance, marriage remained one of the strongest forces holding medieval life together. In the centuries of the Middle Ages, weddings left echoes that went far beyond the bride and groom. They were the thread stitching together the fragile fabric of society. A wedding might mean that two fields were joined, ensuring enough grain to last through winter. It might mean peace between rival lords, sealed not with a treaty but with the forced smiles of a bride and groom who barely knew each other. Even for the Church, every wedding was a victory, a reminder that its authority stretched into the most private parts of life, binding souls not only on earth but for eternity. Yet, for the individuals caught inside these unions, the experience was often less sacred and more suffocating. Many brides stepped into their new homes with the weight of expectation crushing their shoulders, expected to bear heirs quickly or risk shame. Husbands, too, found themselves trapped in roles where affection was irrelevant, and obligation ruled every choice. Still, amid the hardship, the people of the Middle Ages made space for tradition and festivity. Villagers danced in muddy courtyards, torches flickering as laughter rang through the night. Nobles feasted in halls of stone, where the clash of goblets and the roar of fires gave the illusion of joy. Songs were sung, riddles told, and games played, because even when love was absent, life demanded moments of relief. These celebrations, however fleeting, gave people the strength to endure marriages that were more contract than companionship. Over time, whispered romances and tales of forbidden passion began to push against these boundaries. The idea of marrying for love grew slowly, nurtured by poets, troubadours, and dreamers who dared to imagine that affection could stand beside duty. Looking back, it becomes clear why medieval weddings seem so strange to us. They were not about the heart, they were about survival, law, and power. The young were often sacrificed to the ambitions of their families, and women were treated as vessels for wealth and heirs rather than partners. Yet, these unions shaped the course of history, creating dynasties, alliances, and legacies that still echo in our world today. To imagine yourself at a medieval wedding is to step into a place where choice was rare, where love was a dangerous fantasy, and where the words spoken at the church doors bound lives more tightly than iron chains. They remind us that what we take for granted, marrying for love, choosing a partner freely, was once unthinkable. And that is why, for all their feasts and ceremonies, medieval weddings were not romantic, but reminders of how fragile freedom once was, and how costly it could be to dream of love in a world ruled by duty.